He is risen. Hallelujah. Happy Easter, everyone, and welcome to Eternal Life Plan. Today, we're talking about something that comes up a lot in Catholic conversations, especially when things in the church feel frustrating or slow. We see a hot button issue in the news, something that really matters for souls, and we turn to our bishop and think, why isn't he fixing this right now? I get it. We love the church. We want strong leadership, and we expect our shepherds to act. But here's the key thing many good, faithful Catholics misunderstand. Bishops have real authority, but it's limited. It's not unlimited CEO power. According to the Second Vatican Council and the Code of Canon Law, a bishop has ordinary, proper, and immediate power to teach, sanctify, and govern, but only in his own diocese and always in communion with the Pope and the Universal Church. We can't just rewrite dogma, override universal liturgical laws, skip due process, or act like a lone ranger outside his territory. The system is built with checks and balances for a reason, to protect the faith and the faithful and prevent arbitrary rule. Let me give you some real-world examples of where this misunderstanding shows up. First, a pro-abortion Catholic politicians and Holy Communion. That's one hot issue. A lot of people say, my bishop should publicly bar Senator so-and-so from communion tomorrow. Look, Canon 915, Canon 915 does say that someone who is obstinately persevering in manifest grave sin should not be admitted to communion. But applying that is a prudential judgment. It usually requires pastoral dialogue first, and it's handled case by case. The U.S. bishops as a whole have said they can't impose a one-size-fits-all national policy. The Vatican often encourages a pastoral approach over immediate punishment. So when people demand instant public action, they're sometimes expecting power the bishop simply doesn't have in that way. Now, I'm one of the most pro-life people out there. You all know that. And this always comes up with these pro-abortion politicians. I hope I said pro-life. Did I say I'm one of the most pro-life people out there? But here's another problematic situation. This is the second most hot topic out there. Dealing with a bad or difficult priest. Father is terrible. The bishop should laicize him yesterday. Again, canon law requires a formal process, investigation, warnings, the priest's right to defend himself, sometimes a trial. For something as serious as removing a man from the clerical state entirely, Rome usually has to approve it. Bishops can't act arbitrarily without risking the whole thing getting overturned. This is why scandals sometimes seem to drag on. Father Altman is a good example. It's not always laziness, it's often the rule of law in action. Third, the traditional Latin Mass situation after Traditionis Custodes. Some traditional Catholics say, my bishop should just keep allowing the old Mass. Others say he should ban it everywhere immediately. The reality? Those decrees from Pope Francis actually took away a lot of the bishop's previous freedom. Now, for many permissions, you got to go to Rome, to the dicastery for divine worship, and get explicit approval. My bishop in my area allows the Latin Mass because he got an approval to allow it. Bishops don't have the unilateral power they once did on this subject. That's led to a ton of frustrations on all sides, precisely because people assumed the bishop was in control of liturgy in his diocese. Now here's another one. Female altar servers. Some folks have had meltdowns over the use of girl altar servers. But a 2001 Vatican ruling, still in force, says explicitly that a priest cannot be forced to have female altar servers, and the diocesan bishop cannot oblige him to do so. Even though the practice is allowed by universal law, a bishop can't compel priests who want to keep the traditional all-male custom. Fortunately, in my area, they allow girl altar servers. That's a perfect example of limits on authority over his own priest. And finally, expecting a bishop to solve problems outside his own diocese. Why doesn't Bishop A speak out and fix what's happening in Germany or at the Vatican or in another state? The simple answer, he has no jurisdiction there. His authority is territorial. His bishops, his flock, he can't police other bishops or override the Pope. I have seen these conversations, just like I just laid out to you in the monologue, on all of these positions by Catholics who have said these things, and they're wrong. Y'all, when we feel that frustration, the bishop should do something. It's often because we're viewing the hierarchy more like a modern corporation than the mystical body of Christ it truly is. Bishops are shepherds, not CEOs. They operate under universal law in communion with Rome, with due process and subsidiarity built in. Understanding these limits doesn't mean we stop holding our leaders accountable. We can and should speak up charitably, pray for our bishops, and work for reform where it's needed. But it does help us have realistic expectations and avoid unnecessary anger or division. At the end of the day, our hope isn't in any bishop, it's in Christ, who promised the gates of hell would not prevail against his church. He's the one building the eternal life plan for each one of us. Let's keep our eyes on him, stay faithful, form our consciences well, and pray for holy, courageous shepherds who know both their authority and its boundaries. Now, we're bringing in Mike Lewis, founder of Where Peter Is, to discuss on a deeper level, and Mike brings us breaking news. And this is around the recent controversy surrounding the January 22nd meeting at the Pentagon between the DoD officials and Cardinal Pierre. Let's bring in Mike.
Hi, Christine. Happy
Hey,
Easter.
Mike.
Christ is risen.
Yes, he is. He's risen. He's with us.
Yeah, so quite a topic today, and it's been an interesting couple of news days. It's funny because I wrote a tribute to Cardinal Pierre maybe a week or two ago after his retirement was announced, thinking, well, this is just sort of the end, he's going to end in early May as nuncio to the US, and not thinking he was going to be in the middle of a Catholic news story between then and the end of his term. And I doubt he was either, expecting to be in the middle of it. But so I've been hearing from a lot of journalists today because I mentioned in the article that that I know Cardinal Pierre and that we're friends. So they were hoping that I had the scoop. Unfortunately, I don't think I have any information that would surprise anyone or any special knowledge of this story, but I think I can help tie it together and explain why there aren't the answers that people are hoping for.
Okay, Mike, let's start with, let's squash the rumors right now. All right. Cardinal Pierre is retiring, right?
Yes.
Because he's 80 years old.
Yes.
So, he's not being removed, everybody. He's retiring.
And they've kept him on way past retirement age. I think papal diplomats can actually retire at 70 instead of 75, which is when bishops usually retire. And Pope Francis sent him to the US right around his 70th birthday. So he's been here around the decade, I think a little after 70. When he turned 75, Pope Francis asked him to stay on. And then when he turned 80, Pope Leo asked him to stay on until they could get a replacement picked. And they finally did. The new nuncio will be Archbishop Caccia, he's an Italian, and he's currently the Holy See's official UN representative. So pretty high profile archbishop, because the US is obviously a very important post for a nuncio. And fortunately, that means that Archbishop Caccia has been living in the US for the last 5 or 6 years and hopefully has a little bit of familiarity both with the US church and with diplomacy, because obviously, a nuncio plays two roles, really. They're essentially the Vatican ambassador, but then they're also the person who is responsible for passing along recommendations for bishop appointments. So when bishops retire and that sort of thing, he's the guy who passes along the names to the Vatican, and then from there the Vatican, the Pope ultimately decides. So
Mike, for those that may not know what we're talking about with Cardinal Pierre's meeting with the DoD, which is the Department of Defense, could you kind of unpack that
Yeah.
for everyone, what this is all about. This has been all over social media, everyone, especially on X. All kinds, of course, false information, misinformation has been pointing the fingers at all kinds of people. So let's lay this out, Mike, for the
Sure.
audience of what we're talking about.
Okay, so the story is, I think the story was actually published on Monday, but it wasn't advertised until Tuesday, and I don't think anybody noticed it until then. But an outlet called the Free Press published a story saying that in January, Cardinal Pierre, the papal nuncio, was summoned to the Pentagon to have a meeting with Undersecretary Colby, I
Yes.
believe is his name,
Mhm.
of the Department of War, the Department of Defense. According to this news story, the meeting was very contentious, and it involved Colby and other officials basically trying to strong arm the Vatican or convince Pierre and the other Vatican officials there, basically that they need to back the Trump administration's military plans, and and back the strikes on Iraq or Iran. And according to these stories, Pierre and the Vatican officials pushed back. Apparently, at one point, one of the officials supposedly said something about, having another Avignon papacy, which was when the popes lived in Avignon, France, and sort of the French crown had power over, or was able to exert like military power over the popes politically, and I guess the idea was that this was a very contentious meeting, and it was full of all kinds of threats and discord, and so that was the story that sort of broke out on, I guess Wednesday is when the story really started to come out, and then today, I guess the Department of Defense finally issued or last night, actually, the Department of Defense did issue a statement confirming that the meeting took place. And they said it was very cordial and very, very pleasant. And they were discussing various issues of policy and foreign affairs. Today, the nunciature put out a statement confirming that the meeting took place on January 22nd, but said that a lot of the things that were reported about the meeting were distorted. And I think that's basically where the story is going to rest. I know that Brian Birch, the U.S. ambassador to the Holy See, got on the phone with Cardinal Pierre, and according to Birch, Cardinal Pierre dismissed the Avignon papacy line completely as absurd, or and I don't have the statement in front of me right now, but basically said that a lot of those things didn't happen. So then the question is, what can we take from this, and what and what will we ever learn about this? And based on my experience, I don't think we are going to ever, whatever happened in that meeting, whether it was friendly, whether it was, cordial, whether they chuckled the whole time and had a great, had a great discussion. I don't think we're ever going to know the internal details of the meeting, unless somebody who was in the meeting goes on the record and breaks, whatever their security clearances in Washington, or whatever their, pontifical secrets that they vowed to keep from the Vatican. Unless somebody breaks one of those confidences, I don't see it ever becoming what was the details of what were discussed ever becoming a public discussion. And that's just sort of the policy. One of the things with a lot of papal diplomats and bishops, there are certain types of things that are protected under what is called pontifical secrecy. And violating that is an excommunicable offense. So in Pierre's case, for example, if he was to publicly say what happened in that meeting, or if he was to publicly say, oh, the reason why we picked this bishop is because this other bishop said no, and we want to, he's not allowed to divulge that kind of information. And I know that can be frustrating, that the Vatican doesn't give us the full story, but that's really the way it works. I mean, if I was to trust my gut, I think we can all see pretty clearly what Pope Leo thinks of the war and what he thinks of the U.S. policy. He's been pretty clear about that. We've seen what Archbishop Broglio of the U.S. Military Services has said, and what Archbishop Coakley from the USCCB have said about this war, and we've seen what a lot of our own private, our own personal diocesan bishops have weighed in on it. I know that mine joined his voice to, he issued a statement joining his voice to Archbishop Coakley's. So I think regardless of whether it was a friendly meeting or whether they were screaming at each other, I don't think that there's anything huge that, anything really that pertinent that we need to know from that meeting. Obviously there are areas where there are areas of disagreement between the Holy See and the White House, on this war, and anybody who's been following church news and U.S. news would know that. But the meeting itself, it's one of those things where it seemed like before any of these official statements came out, there was the one story in the Free Press that was, and talking to journalists, and I don't know anything about, I didn't even know what the Free Press was until this story broke. Talking to other journalists, talking to Vatican journalists reached out to me because I exposed myself as knowing Cardinal Pierre, were talking to me. I've heard that they aren't necessarily the most reliable news outlet out there. Obviously, he got a pretty big scoop that this meeting did take place. And he may have heard some information, and he may have sort of padded it or created a narrative out of it. It's possible that everything that he said in there is true, but I think since it was denied by both sides, and the fact that Ambassador Birch quoted Pierre as saying that some of these lines, like the Avignon line, was absurd. Now, granted, this isn't coming directly from Pierre, but it would really hurt international relations if one ambassador misquoted another ambassador.
Oh, sure.
It would be very, so I guess that's the thing. It's an interesting fact that that the Vatican nuncio to the U.S. Was called to a meeting in the Pentagon. As far as anyone knows, it never happened before. But then again, we never would have known about this meeting except for this report. So everything was under wraps. And I think for the rest of our conversation, this is one of the things. And once again, like you, I totally understand the frustration, because sometimes it feels like the Vatican's not doing anything, and sometimes they aren't. But sometimes their default posture is silence. And so on almost anything, whether it's diplomacy or matters of discipline of a bishop or discipline of a priest, their instinct is not to comment. And a lot of times at the end, we might see at the end, Bishop so-and-so resigned for health reasons and has been replaced by an administrator. We'll see that announcement from the Vatican, but we aren't going to know all the details. And people let their imaginations run away with them at that point.
Let me read to everyone what the U.S. and Holy See statement that they made. And they are the U.S. Embassy to the Holy See. And it says, Ambassador Birch spoke today with His Eminence Cardinal Pierre, the outgoing papal nuncio to the United States regarding his January meeting with Undersecretary Elbridge Colby. The cardinal emphatically denied the media's portrayal of his meeting with Colby. He described the meeting as frank, but very cordial and a normal encounter. He confirmed that the reporting does not reflect what happened and was just invented to make a story. That's a quote. Quote, does not reflect what happened, just invented to make a story, close quote. The U.S. government and our embassy regularly meets with representatives of the Holy See, including the nuncio. Deliberate misrepresentation of these routine meetings sows unfounded division and misunderstanding. Our relationship remains strong and productive. So there you go.
Yeah, and I mean, some people are challenging Ambassador Birch's credibility. I mean, I guess the thing is, if you're going to go on the public record like that and provide, in quotes, what Cardinal Pierre told you, it would just be really, really bad form to misquote him, because he can always. I wouldn't expect Cardinal Pierre to publicly correct him, but it would really hurt relations between the U.S. and the Holy See.
Are you able to read the statement that Cardinal Pierre texted you?
Yeah, and it basically, I did. People were asking me if I had heard from Cardinal Pierre, and he gave me the official statement, which is the statement that the nunciature gave to everybody. Let me pull that up. We can confirm that Cardinal Pierre had a meeting on January 22nd, 2026 at the Pentagon, where he and several officials had discussed current affairs. Meetings with government officials are a standard practice for the nuncio, who serves as the Holy See's ambassador to the United States. The Apostolic Nunciature is grateful for the opportunities to meet and dialogue with government officials and others in Washington to discuss areas of mutual concern. So
it's basically the same thing the ambassador said. Yeah.
It is a very neutral statement. And if you remember, and this is kind of once again, it's a matter of secrecy. If you remember when Pope Francis would have meetings with people, and people would come out of these meetings saying, oh, the Pope told us this and the Pope told us that. And the Vatican and Pope Francis would say, Pope Francis doesn't comment on private conversations. Even the thing is, the Vatican is going to uphold that standard wherever it can. And it's very extraordinary circumstances where they correct the public record. One example, and this isn't a matter of international diplomacy, but a lot of people complained. There was an Italian journalist in his 90s, Eugenio Scalfari, who interviewed Pope Francis early in his papacy. And Eugenio Scalfari was a famous columnist, journalist in Italy. His technique was to have a conversation with someone. This was his interview technique. He wouldn't take any notes and he wouldn't record it. And then he'd go back and he'd reconstruct the conversation that he had with the person, and he would publish that as the interview. And the very first time he did that, it sounded somewhat like Pope Francis, but it was a little bit edgier than he usually is. And it's not clear how many interviews were actually done. I think it may have only been one or two, it may have only been two or three. I think 2 or 3 interviews, but he was able to stretch it into about 6 or 7 articles. And he treated it like it was a new interview every single time. And I think by the second one, the Vatican did offer a response, sort of like this one, confirming that there was a discussion between Pope Francis and Mr. Scalfari, but it also said something to the effect of, the words attributed to Pope Francis cannot be considered his. something like that.
I remember that, Mike.
Well, it was said so subtly in such a
Yeah.
diplomatic fashion that people didn't quite realize that that was sort of the Vatican's way of saying, this guy's just making this stuff up, but people are like, why did they only say it that lightly? Why isn't he, condemning him? And that's just not the way it works. They aren't coming out with these strong condemnations. They're coming out with these statements where, if you read them closely, saying that the words attributed to the Pope cannot be considered his actual words is a pretty strong statement. Now, in the Vatican statement in this case, I think they just issued a statement saying that it took place and that they discussed areas of concern and whether they were having a good old time and reaching mutual agreement, or whether they were screaming at each other. You can't get that from the statement. And the US government is trying to put a very positive spin on it. And maybe it was positive. I don't know. But I think what we can know is that the Vatican, and another thing and so this is maybe the breaking news. The other thing that Cardinal Pierre sent to me directly was the tweet by Father Antonio Spadaro, who he was another person who interviewed Pope Francis on the record, but he actually put Pope Francis's actual words in the interview. And one of the things that, and really with Spadaro, who I think has a book that just came out on Vatican diplomacy, he made a general statement about the way that the Holy See interacts with other countries. So he wrote, "The diplomacy of the Holy See does not seek the spotlight, but it is never absent. This became clear now when the Apostolic Nunciature in the United States confirmed a meeting on January 22nd between Cardinal Christophe Pierre and officials at the Pentagon. At a time when international language is increasingly dominated by the logic of force, deterrence, and security, the quiet presence of Vatican diplomacy in places of power takes on a particular significance. That unusual meeting at the Pentagon signals that the Vatican diplomacy can enter the very spaces where that logic is shaped in order to introduce discreetly another grammar. It is not a spectacular diplomacy, but a diplomacy of presence, listening, dialogue, persistence. It is also a signal addressed to American Catholicism. The Holy See does not present itself as a counterparty, but as an interlocutor. It does not shy away from engagement with institutions, not even military ones, but seeks to orient that engagement toward what it calls areas of mutual concern. In a context marked by deep polarization, this approach avoids both alignment and frontal opposition. In the end, coherence emerges precisely here, a public voice that rejects war and a diplomatic presence that does not renounce speaking with those who prepare it, seeking as far as possible to prevent its inevitability. So this is basically the general approach. The contention is between the US and Iran. It's not between the US and the Vatican, but the Vatican is coming in as an interlocutor, a third party who is interested in global affairs, who is a player on the world stage, and their role is not to get in between the two parties, but to offer the gospel, essentially, a message of peace, a message of human dignity. And so that's what the Vatican is trying to do. For example, people have talked about Ukraine and Russia and that conflict. And a lot of people were criticizing Pope Francis for speaking to Russia, for trying to talk to their the Patriarch Kirill in Moscow, and trying to get trying to keep dialogue up with the Russians. And it's because the Vatican recognizes and the Holy Father as the father of the church, as our pastor to the world, whether you're Catholic or not. He doesn't want to see his sons fighting with each other. He doesn't want to see violence. He doesn't want to see hatred. And so if you cut one side off, even if you disagree with them, that's going to uh, that's not the way that the church wants to approach these situations. The Pope since 1870 hasn't been a temporal leader, hasn't had a country to rule, hasn't had, I mean, the Swiss Guards, I guess, is the Vatican's military, um, for what it is, and they aren't in the business of going to war. And so that's the direction that this is coming from. I think people are trying to score political points on this. If it's if the sensation, I think some people are trying to say that everything was hunky-dory, which it probably wasn't. I think we can assume that because we know what Pope Leo has said. But whether or not they were screaming at each other or, having a big fight or making threats, I don't think ultimately that matters very much in the greater scheme of things.
Well, once again, it's a story that it's interesting, Mike, that happened 3 months ago, and now
Yeah.
all of a sudden it's becoming another scandal that they're trying to make a scandal about the Catholic Church. And when I first saw it, of course, I saw the tweet with Christopher Hale that he tweeted, and I'm not a fan, by the way. But and then I started looking into it more, and then you and I talked, and that's why I wanted you to bring this to everyone's attention tonight. So let's move on, and let's go to my opening question, and that is, you kind of touched on this when it comes to the Vatican, so it is also true with bishops. My question is, isn't it true that when a bishop has a private discussion with a priest or a layperson and decides to take disciplinary action, that discipline is rarely made public by the bishop himself? Or are there specific situations where a bishop will choose to make the disciplinary action public, and what factors guide that decision?
Yeah. So yeah, this is an interesting question, and I think it's, in today's day and age, we're used to sort of having the whole scandal pour out. One thing that
And it almost reminds me online, when people are saying, why doesn't his bishop do something? It just reminds me of the crowd in the Bible, crucifying. That's what it reminds me of.
Yeah, and I think one of the things, and on this, I'm sort of giving the perspective of the church. I think that there's, in the age of the internet, I think further discussions need to be made about the level of transparency of things and why things happen. I mean, one of the things that you have to keep in mind is that online Catholicism is a very, very small percentage of the church. I'd say maybe 5% of Catholics, 5% of the people in the pews maybe will have eventually heard of this story. Who is Cardinal Pierre? What is a nuncio? And so a lot of people, their relationship with the church is very personal and very communal. It's tied to their faith in God, their love of the sacraments, their ties to their parish community, and that's fine. Not everyone needs to be up on all the Catholic news in the world. And I think for some of us who are tied up in that stuff, it can be very disillusioning at times, right?
Yeah.
I mean, once we start hearing about one scandal after another, I mean, it can be faith harming. It can be
Depressing.
It can be depressing. It can rattle us. Or maybe we can get caught in we're rooting for this person and we're gonna back this person no matter what. And we see people with followings and with fans that back them up over that, over some issue. But the default in canon law is for privacy and for graduated, sort of gradual correction in private. And it's a gospel principle. In Matthew 18, it says, go first to your brother, and then bring 2 or 3 and then eventually take them to the church. There are some cases when there is when there is discipline, that the bishop is required to publicly announce, either through canon law, if it is abuse of a child and the priest is removed, that needs to be that is made public. There are other cases where, let's say a priest has committed a private sin, a consensual relationship with somebody, or some kind of something like that doesn't rise to the level of a crime, and either the bishop gets wind of it, and it either needs to be investigated, or the priest confesses it, and the priest might take a leave of absence. And this is partially, to some extent, it's a situation where it's not quite the confessional seal, but if it's a private matter, in order to preserve someone's good name, you don't want to put someone's private details all over creation. In other cases, the scandal becomes public. We can talk about Father Altman or Bishop Strickland, but even in those cases, if I remember the timeline with Father Altman, I believe in early 2021 or maybe late 2020, after Altman had been public for a few months, his bishop finally put out a statement saying, he's exceeded what a priest should be doing or saying publicly, and I will be talking to him privately, and hopefully he'll correct himself. And then I think it was in July of 2021 that he said he was removing him as pastor of the parish, and then where he was pastor, and then Father Altman, he was removed, but he was able to appeal it. A couple of years after that, and this was not a huge public announcement, but I actually was wondering, hey, this was over a year ago. This appeal should be over. So I went to the Diocese of La Crosse's website, and I saw that the guy who had been placed as temporary administrator of St. James the Less Parish in La Crosse had been elevated from administrator to pastor.
Yeah.
That's obviously a sign that Father Altman lost his appeal. Now, why there was no public announcement at that point, it seems to me that there may be more going on, because Father Altman has essentially declared that he doesn't believe that Vatican II is valid. He doesn't believe that he didn't believe that Francis was Pope. I think he said the same thing about Pope Leo. So there might be further canonical sanctions that are going on.
But well, he has stated publicly that his appeal is still ongoing in Rome.
And it may be for these other things, because because being removed as pastor indicates to me that the appeal of the first thing, his removal, has been taken away, or that that he lost that, because otherwise they wouldn't have been able to remove him. But he could very well be contesting his potential excommunication, potential laicization. I mean, that's one of the things, like with Father Frank Pavone. I think it was when he put an aborted baby's body on an altar and was using it in a political stump speech, and his bishop said basically made an announcement or put out a statement saying that I'll be pursuing canonical action, and then we didn't hear anything from Pavone for 6 years, and then all of a sudden we find out that he was laicized. Not only was he suspended or whatever, he was removed from ministry completely. So, and I think that's one of the things with canon law that's different than civil law, is that, and it's one of those things where it's kind of debatable. If someone is under trial for heresy or for schism or for conduct unbecoming a priest or whatever, chronic disobedience. I don't know what the grounds necessarily were for Father Pavone, but it's like it was 6 years of silence, and Father Pavone kept going out and kept saying things and kept making statements and all kinds of things like that. And people are like, where is his bishop? Why isn't he reining him in? And I mean, my guess is that his bishop probably suffered greatly for it, having to keep his mouth shut, because I guess it was secret. And similar things happen with even with abuse cases. Now, when there's an abuse case, we're told so-and-so has been suspended from ministry because we've gotten credible allegations of abuse.
Yeah, even on some of the diocese websites I have been on, they list the priests
Yes.
that have been charged with abuse. They list and I'll tell you what, it just took my breath away, especially West Coast diocese. There's a lot of them on there.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I was shocked how many are listed on the diocese websites.
And it's a tough thing, because in a lot of cases, like, credibly accused basically means that somebody who, made an allegation that could be true, but it doesn't mean that this person was found guilty. In a lot of cases, the person has a lot of allegations against them, and the statute of limitations has passed, or they've died, and there's just been not enough evidence to civilly contest them. But like, I know an example of one priest who in my archdiocese, who passed away maybe 15 years before the Archdiocese of Washington put out their list. But this priest apparently had one allegation against him that was, it was a woman who said that she had and I don't know. But she said it was from like a repressed memory, and she brought up this priest's name.
Oh, I know who you're talking about.
He was he was like 100 years old at the time, and so they just sort of whisked him away and kept it. He was living in the old folks' home, and he was blind. So, it's one of those stories where they made a judgment call, and this was probably back in the 90s or something, whenever this happened, and so they didn't make it public, but it was, at the time, I guess it was a judgment call. But it's that kind of thing. Did he do it? Did he not? Somebody said that he did, and there's no way of knowing whether or not she was telling the truth. Most of the time, victims are telling the truth. That's one thing that we do have to keep in mind. But there are false allegations, and so it's a really tough situation. And a lot of these names, there just never is a resolution. The case just sort of dies. But in a lot of cases, either the bishop strongly suspects, or putting them back into ministry would be too much, without a resolution, that would just create too big of a scandal. So a lot of times they're just kept out of ministry, and now these lists are all coming out. So
yeah.
But like, for example, with Cardinal McCarrick, or former Cardinal McCarrick, Ted, when Ted was am I still on? Are you there?
You're still on, yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
So when Cardinal McCarrick, I think it was June 2018, when the allegations against him were made public, and at the time, a lot of people were immediately saying, why hasn't he been, why is he still in the College of Cardinals? And for a few months they were saying that. But what was happening was his case had gone from New York to Rome, and then it took them a few months to do his trial, or to handle his case in Rome. And then he resigned, obviously under pressure from the College of Cardinals, by the end of the summer. And then people were saying, well, why is he still an archbishop? And they kept saying that for a few months. And then, by January, I think he was removed. And the thing is, this process was taking place, but we weren't getting regular updates about what was happening. And then after he was, laicized, it was, when is the McCarrick report going to come out? And we weren't getting updates about the McCarrick report. It's you're muted. I can't hear you. I can't hear you right now. Can you hear me?
Oh, sorry. I
I
had
can hear you.
my mic muted.
Oh.
Sorry. I've done it before, Mike. There's no formal process that people can go to the Vatican website and see where these cases are, correct?
No, they
Okay.
can't. That's the thing. It's under pontifical secret. It's under it's one of those things where, and this is something where I think that there could be more transparency.
Yeah.
I think, well, for example, the only reason why we know all the reasons behind Vigano's excommunication. One, we knew that he was summoned to the Vatican because he published his summons on Twitter.
Right.
We wouldn't have known that was going to happen. And then when he was finally excommunicated, the Vatican put out a statement saying that Vigano was excommunicated for schism, but then Vigano went and uploaded the 11-page PDF that they sent him giving all the reasons why he was excommunicated, which was a very fascinating document because you never see the reasons why, he's the one who revealed it. When you talk about Bishop Strickland.
And he didn't show up for his hearing either, correct?
Yeah, he didn't show up for his hearing, but what was interesting is if you look at that document, which we translated into English on Where Peter Is, it was originally in Italian, they actually provided him with a defense for because he's owed one in their court system. And I mean, it was kind of funny because it was like, even though basically, and this is me paraphrasing, summarizing, so don't take it word for word, but even though he's clearly guilty of all this stuff and he deserves it, if we were to excommunicate him, it might cause greater scandal. So that was his defense attorney basically saying it, but he didn't have anything to do with it. But the fact that he shared it, it was a very fascinating document. And in the case of Bishop Strickland, we know from the Vatican that he was removed administratively from his office by the Pope and replaced with an administrator, but they've never given the reasons explicitly. All we have from Strickland is his version of the story. And so people were only hearing, Strickland's side of the story, and the Vatican was never publicly correcting him or anything like that. They were able to glean, because they did an apostolic visitation where they interviewed maybe 20 or 30 priests and diocesan employees and parishioners, and some of those people talked, and I've spoken to several of them about the types of questions that were being asked. But when Bishop Strickland was saying some pretty unbelievable things about what Cardinal Pierre was saying to him along the way. I mean, my impression is that there were a lot of conversations with Bishop Strickland prior to his removal.
Well, some of the people have come forward and talked about it.
Yeah.
Talked about, how he mismanaged the finances and
well, and that, it's funny because, and I don't want to throw anyone necessarily under the bus, but he's talked about it a little bit. In 2017 and 2018, he made a lot of administrative decisions that were bad, in terms of like losing money for the archdiocese, trusting the wrong people, and a lot of people from the diocese wrote to the nunciature, wrote to the Vatican, complaining about what he was doing, and then the Vatican didn't act on it then. But then when he started saying all of these outrageous things, they went sort of I guess the easiest route for them was to take all of those complaints and then to go down to the diocese and sort of check out the situation, where they got the accounts of the heterodox things that Strickland was saying and the outrageous conspiracy theories and favoritism and the strange things that were going on in the diocese on top of that. But his removal was probably more for what he did in 2017, 2018 than the things that he was tweeting in 2022, 2023.
Bad decisions he made.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And so then people are saying, oh, well, he was removed for administrative reasons. And I mean, and this is just my interpretive lens. This is not the official Vatican line, but it's just sort of like, I think maybe in the Vatican, they're thinking, all right, this guy has gotten to be big trouble. He's got to go. And it's like, hey, we've got a big enough case already with, his mismanagement of funds. So let's remove him. But this is all my interpretive framework. This isn't stuff that, this is what I've been able to put together from various people that I've been talking to. It's not the official line of the Vatican.
Yeah.
The Vatican says that they removed him for administrative reasons. He's now the Bishop Emeritus of Tyler, Texas. He's not under any public restrictions. But then we see some of his actions, like when he went to Florida. He said that none of the Florida bishops would allow him to say a mass in one of their churches. So there is a little bit of a suspension.
Whoa.
And that's the reason why he did that mass in that Marionite church.
Okay.
Father Altman celebrated that mass, and so he's doing it at a Maronite church with a suspended priest, and I mean that's a whole other story. But it's
how could he have celebrated the mass, because he's not supposed to be doing public masses. He's not supposed to be saying public masses.
He broke the rules. He doesn't care about.
Yeah, well, he broke the rules here too, in Indianapolis.
Yeah, at the Eucharistic Congress, he gave that special Tridentine mass at the baseball stadium, right?
Don't get me started on that. Yeah.
So
Vicky Yamasaki and her group helped.
Altman is openly, basically flouting the church's discipline and doesn't care. And the church, so people are saying, well, why hasn't the church officially acted here? Why hasn't, it's, he said that he's got this appeal going on in the background or that's still ongoing. And my guess is that these actions are going into that file. And then when eventually something happens, then maybe we'll know what the end result is.
But he seems like he's digging his own grave, though.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, it seems like a no-brainer.
Yeah.
From our perspective, why don't you just? I mean, he is technically suspended. He's technically it's been established. His vicar general has said he's not to present himself as a priest, and he's suspended from public ministry. Yet he continues to go around the country and say mass and wear a collar and go by father and. So a lot of times, and this is something that, that can be aggravating, is that he's clearly violating church law. But but we're not getting any official word from the church.
Let me bring this up, Mike. There's a priest here in my diocese that, this goes back to 2021. When all the BLM riots were going on, and he had put in the bulletin what Black Lives Matter was actually about. All right, not the narrative, but their history. And the Black Lives Matter group here just went ballistic. Bishop Doherty removed him, suspended him, and I have so much respect for Father Rothrock because he went away for 4 months, didn't speak to media, did not speak to anybody. I mean, I'm sure there were people that knew where he was, but nobody was in contact with him. He wasn't speaking to a soul. He obeyed. He went away. And in 4 months, he was reinstated and put into another church, another parish. And then the Father Altman thing happened, and then the Bishop Strickland thing happened, and then the Coalition for Canceled Priests happened. And I look back at that and I think, here, Father Rothrock, in my opinion, should not have been suspended, but that wasn't my choice. That was the bishop's. And he didn't make a big deal. He didn't make a big deal about it. He went away. He was obedient. He did what he was told. And oh my gosh, I prayed for that man. My heart broke for him. But
well, and
instead of making a fuss, he was obedient.
And I think in a lot of cases, bishops are trying to help priests get back into ministry. I mean, there's sometimes, if it's a situation of abuse and it's a he said, she said, and there's just no way to completely exonerate the person, I can understand why a bishop would err on the side of caution for something like that. But when it's another situation, when it's a matter of public scandal, or, I mean, sometimes there's a situation where a priest might say something that is bombastic, or that is seen as just too radioactive and controversial. And it's like, okay, this priest can't just stay in this parish right now because things are just too crazy. So let's give him a leave of absence, have him take a 4-month retreat in a monastery. And if he does everything the right way, then we can bring him back, And so I think, but once again, nobody knows where the priest is. Nobody knows exactly what words were exchanged. And this is just one of those things. And I'm just saying this as a reality, like working for the church, actually getting the full explanation on a lot of these things. Like I worked for the church for a decade. I just sort of got used to, if the church actually says something, I'm surprised, So I think, that's sort of a situation where, and I mean, you even look at Father Chad Ripperger when he moved from Tulsa Oklahoma, and went to Denver. And I kind of have to give him credit on at least knowing how the system works, even though I don't really think he's fit for ministry. But when the new Bishop Kunderla, arrived in Tulsa in 2016, he asked Mother Miriam and Father Ripperger, and I think there were 3 groups total to leave the diocese. And
really,
yes, and in this case, and I think it might have been the first time I heard of Father Ripperger, even like around 2016. But I saw some of the blogs were generating a lot of like anger about Father Ripperger being canceled and that kind of thing. But then one of the blogs I saw deleted all of its complaints about what was happening with Father Ripperger, and wrote something like, Father Ripperger has asked that we stop protesting and don't contact the bishop, and quietly pray for him. And then within a couple of months he had reemerged in Denver. Like he knew how to work the system wisely, and if people have an interest in remaining in public ministry, that's what they'll do. Now I think my own opinion is that at this point Ripperger has gone so far beyond what the church teaches and responsible priesthood, that I think his active ministry need. But that's just my opinion. And we'll see what the new archbishop does. But if that makes any sense to you.
Yeah, it does. It seems like what we can expect from the bishop is they are not going to go public unless it's extremely serious and something scandalous has happened. Then they will go public. Other than that, they're going to handle everything behind the scenes with dialogue. They'll give them every chance that they can to be obedient, to correct the things that the bishop is asking them to correct, and try to keep them in ministry as much as possible. Am I getting the gist right?
Yeah, I think that's the basic gist of it. I mean, it's a calculus. It's one of those things where if the scandal exceeds what the average person knows. Now, sometimes it gets out of hand, and I think it's happened in the past. Like if we look at, I think we've discussed the Bayside apparitions before.
The
Correct?
what?
Bayside, like Veronica Lucan, she was a Marian apparition. This isn't a bishop situation, but she had those. Basically, she was a Long Island housewife that had claimed that she was getting locutions from Mary starting in the early 1970s, and by the end of the 70s and early 80s, she was attracting crowds of 70,000 people to her prayer rallies at the Olympic Park, or the World's Fair Center in Long Island, and unfortunately, so then the bishop finally issued a public denunciation of this apparition in 1986. So it's like
Wow,
16
it
years
took
went
that
by,
long.
and this thing had grown completely out of hand, and so this was a situation where prudence might have had. But the thing is, all along, the bishop and the pastor had been meeting with Veronica Lucan to try to get her to follow church structures, or to try to maybe talk some sense into her. But she's giving these fiery end times prophecies and saying that Pope Paul VI was replaced with a body double. And, she was there during the time of the first, as they called them back then, test tube babies. She had, and she said that test tube babies don't have souls. I mean, she had all kinds of just crazy statements that were supposedly messages from Jesus and Mary and saints, and people were believing it. And so, this is why my personal opinion is sometimes the public needs to be notified, or the public needs to be notified more often than they are, than the church usually lets them. Then the church speaks out on things. Like,
Well,
it would have been
a lot of
nice if there had been some updates along the way with Altman or with Strickland, because they'd become so popular.
Well, and they have distilled, I'm not saying them specifically, but they have distilled so much distrust
Yeah.
in the church hierarchy that the Catholics don't even trust what the bishops are saying and doing, and that has become a real problem these days. I mean, I'll raise my hand. I was one of those until I finally got out of that trad movement. And I don't mean all traditional Catholics are like this, but the rad trad movement, when I got out of that, I finally realized how much it had influenced me against the bishops as well.
And that's one thing. I think that was their great, I guess for lack of a better word, their great triumph during Pope Francis's papacy, was they were able. So we're talking about the traditionalist movement, specifically even like the SSPX, their attitude towards the hierarchy, which is basically, we can judge when the hierarchy is wrong, and when they're wrong, we can do what we want to do. They basically, that mindset, they had this whole philosophy that was ready made for when people wanted to reject Pope Francis's teaching and reject his authority. It was like they, regular conservative, just sort of mainstream conservative Catholics started adopting the line of thinking from the SSPX. And so now, when a bishop says something, or when the Pope says something that they don't agree with, they can just, that doesn't count. It's not traditional, and they've sort of, that mindset has become more mainstream. It's sort of this world. I mean, the great irony is they say that what the church teaches is not church teaching. I mean, it's like, the church teaches that in light of the gospel, the death penalty is an attack on the inviolability and dignity of the person. Like, it starts with the church teaches, and they're like, no, the church doesn't teach that. Like, what should we say?
That's all over Twitter.
Yeah.
Or I should say X.
and the fact that they can just look at a statement like that, and then at first they're like, oh, well, it's just in the, it's just in the catechism, and the catechism itself is only, and they have these excuses about the stuff in the catechism is only as as authoritative as the statement that, as the teachings that it, that it's grounded on. But then Pope Francis says the same thing in an encyclical, and then he, it comes out in a DDF declaration, and they're still kind of saying it's not really church teaching. It's a weird thing, and that's a doctrinal thing, not a disciplinary thing.
But you know what, Mike? I've talked to David L. Gray about this, and he says this is just all a U.S. thing. It's not like that in Europe.
No, a lot of it is tied to, people say that, unfortunately, like, it's funny. There's a lot of countries outside of the U.S. Like, I think a lot of them, first of all, they have parliamentary systems where, so they have like 5 or 6 political parties. So, there's more than just Republican and Democrat to choose from. And so there might be one, like, obviously Catholic teaching doesn't align with one of our something, they're basically, they've split Catholic teaching, some would say down the middle, some would say one party, but they split it. And from there, I think the parties are forming us. I think a lot of people also are looking, there's, in the Republican Party, there's a coalition between evangelicals and Catholics. And not to disparage our evangelical brothers and sisters in Christ, but there's, they don't hold to all of the same moral teachings that the Catholic Church does. We can just look at, the death penalty is one thing, but in terms of just sort of, you look at what the Catholic Church has said about healthcare and about protecting the environment, and there are evangelicals that definitely do work on both of these issues, but it seems that we're just sort of allowing these things to get parsed up. But if there were 8 political parties and we could join one of these 8, there might be one that actually aligns more with where Catholics are. We do have teeny tiny parties like the American Solidarity Party or whatever that try to blend Catholic social teaching and social issues to Catholic values. But I don't know. Somebody said, why aren't you voting for the American Solidarity Party? And I'm like, when their presidential nominee has more Twitter followers than I do, then, I'll consider it. It's like it's not even making a dent. So it is a frustrating situation, but it's also just like the statement from Father Spadaro. The Catholic Church is there as more of a third way. As obviously, we do have this 2-party system that we have to operate within, but we should be working towards making our parties closer to what we believe, closer to our values, rather than letting those values influence us, the things that don't align.
Yeah. All right. Any last parting words about the bishops?
Yeah.
About the bishop hierarchy and what Catholics really need to know about bishop hierarchy?
Yeah. Okay. So just a very short overall thing about sort of how so the Pope is the Bishop of Rome, and a lot of people sort of see this is a general overview of bishop's authority, and each bishop, if they're a diocesan bishop, they are over a territory. So you're in the Archdiocese of Indianapolis, I'm in the Archdiocese of Washington, and so those bishops are appointed by the Pope, and each one is basically sovereign within his diocese. Like, he has a lot of latitude over the diocese. No bishop. So the Diocese of Arlington, Virginia is right across the Potomac River from us. Our bishop can't do anything about that bishop, and that bishop can't do anything about us. A lot of people are confused about what the USCCB does, and I worked with the USCCB for 7 years, and so I'd like to. So it is where the bishops come together to work on initiatives. If the American Church wants to speak as a voice, meaning the leaders of each of the local churches, the 173 or whatever dioceses in the U.S., if they want to come together and speak as one voice, what they do and they want to make a statement on, I mean, immigration, on abortion, on assisted suicide. Like when I was there, we worked on a statement on assisted suicide. They do have committees that come together and draft the statement. They have a vote, and then so that statement basically is only has authority if the local bishop accepts that statement, or if he doesn't prohibit it. So they so if a bishop like Strickland, like a lot of people are saying, why hasn't the USCCB disciplined Bishop Strickland? It's never happened, ever, that the U.S. bishops have publicly censored another bishop. A lot of there was talk about some of the bishops publicly rebuking Cardinal Supich over the Dick Durbin communion question, or not communion, giving him an award.
Because he's pro-abortion.
Yeah, and they would have, and the thing is, that would have been unprecedented. The USCCB has never done that before, because every bishop is essentially sovereign in his own diocese. And so really the appeal, if you were to protest, would be to the nuncio and to the Pope. I know that back in I think the early 2000s, there was, or mid 2000s, there was Bishop Martino in Scranton, didn't like something that the USCCB had passed, and he voted against it. And I remember he gave a press conference and basically said, this document has no authority in this diocese whatsoever. Made a very, very strong, very, very profound statement against it. And because he's the local bishop, it was rejected. Now, a lot of times,
well, let me ask you this, Mike. Let me ask you this. Sure. So if a Catholic has a complaint about her bishop or his bishop, who do they go to? The nuncio?
Yeah, I mean, that would be and unfortunately, whether or not you get a response is, hit or miss. I mean, or mostly miss.
So if you can't resolve it with your own bishop, then your next step would be to the nuncio.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, there are certain things. I mean, and obviously it's and this is, I mean, people say, if we look at what happened in 2002, the bishops didn't take real action on abuse until enough people went to the secular press, and the press. And I mean, I'm not advising it. I'm just saying things that might be effective.
When the Boston Globe broke it.
Yeah, when the Boston Globe exposed it, it was unavoidable because the story blew up, and that's when the Vatican and the U.S. bishops had to respond. But yeah, I guess I think that the idea of synodality, where people's voices can be heard at the lowest level, like things don't just get, people have a deep concern or an area of hurt or an area where there's a scandal going on. I think that the means of Catholics to be able to express their concerns, it's important. And I actually, it's interesting. I would say that journalism and good Catholic writing, and even YouTube, can be good ways of amplifying these voices, or letting people know about issues, or letting people know that they're not alone. Because if they hear somebody's story and they're like, oh, this happened to me too, or, oh, I've been wondering about this as well, this needs to change. I mean, I'm not saying that the church is always in need of reform. I mean, I think Pope Francis actually said part of the history of the Catholic Church is constantly reforming. I mean, people talk about the Council of Trent, and they talk like that is perennial tradition, but there are certain things that the Council of Trent did that totally revolutionized, like priests. The seminary system, like we think of priests go to seminary, and that's how that was established at the Council of Trent. I mean, priests were being ordained for whatever, however the bishop decided it would go. I mean, I'm sure there were seminaries that didn't come out of nowhere, but some priests probably didn't go to any seminary. There were certain, these reforms happen, and a lot of times they happen in crisis. So Yes, the
So
official channel. Yeah.
if they go to the nuncio and let's
Mhm.
say the nuncio doesn't respond, would their next um, course of action be to go to Rome?
I mean, the nuncio is basically the channel to Rome. If it is if it's an issue of abuse and nobody's responding, then I think, well, there you should have an independent hotline that you can call. Go to the police, obviously, if there's an abuse situation that's a legal problem. Do your due diligence there. But if it's a question of, you know, a bishop that's sanctioned, I don't know, sanctioned some kind of liturgical abuse or something like that. Um, I think, yeah, writing to the Dicastery of Divine Worship, writing to the nuncio, but also, letting your voice be heard in some way. I mean, that's one of the things. Like what I'm doing right now, what we've been doing, sort of exposing Father Ripperger and exposing some of the things that traditionalists are doing when um, you know, knowledge is power, having a voice is power. Unfortunately, a lot of the bishops, they prefer not to speak out on things, but then I've been told by bishops that I say a lot of the things that they wish they could say publicly. They don't want to be tied up in some scandal or some polarization. So
I've
um
had priests that have written me since I did my video on Monday about Father Rittberger, and they fully supported my video. Um, so, of course, one retweeted it or
mhm.
reposted it on X, and I asked you about that priest. But um, so they may not say it publicly, but they are encouraging people behind the scenes like me, like you, and everyone. I want you all to know, and I have failed to say this every time Mike has been on, he has a Patreon account. If want to open up your heart and donate to, thank you, Nicole. Nicole's moderating tonight. She's on it as usual. There it is, where Peter is on Patreon. That's the link. And if you could put it in the comment too, so everybody has it, Nicole, that would be helpful. But he has a Patreon account, and you have a donation button that
Yes.
goes to PayPal as well.
Yeah, and so it's on every. I mean, it is on every page, and it's on the right hand column of every article. But it's also, I think, maybe at the bottom of every single article. So can't miss it. I mean, we're sort of a shoestring operation, but
They
we
don't,
do it.
you guys, they don't have big donors. They don't have big donors just flushing them with money.
Well, and it's the funniest thing because a lot of people say that we're funded by George Soros or by the Jesuits or something like that, and I'm like, well, that's actually, I take it as a compliment because they think that we're funded by big money, but that is most certainly not the case. Um, and it's funny for all the abuse that like a lot of our contributors get.
Oh,
Um, I think we do it because of our faith, and I guess that's one thing that I want to say. If you have concerns, if you have a real concern about something that that's happening in the church, in your local church, or you've seen some priest online do something that you find scandalous, I think one of the things that's important to do is to obviously pray about it, discern about it, but also to seek counsel. Talk to maybe priests, or people who have been, sort of active in the Catholic Church and maybe know the system a little bit to see, if what you are experiencing is, maybe to gain greater insight. There's certain things that people interpret as an abuse, like you brought up altar girls, for example. Um, Altar girls were allowed explicitly by St. John Paul II in 1994. But some people may not, they may think that because it used to only be boys in the past, that only boys are allowed. Like there's certain things that people don't realize are legitimate options in the church. And a lot of things that you might see on YouTube or on the blogosphere might mislead you about whether something is permitted or whether something is orthodox. So, obviously seek counsel, try to discern, and then, before you wind up going public with anything. A lot of times, actually, people will get responses from bishops. They'll say, "Thank you for your concern." And so I have seen letters from. I've never gotten a letter from a bishop. That's, sometimes I get good
I'd have a
responses from
heart
bishops
attack if I got one.
that actually said, "The reason why we are doing this is because this is allowed, or this is what we were instructed by the Holy See, or there's the church teaching is, and give the quote from the catechism." I've seen things like this before that can be clarifying. And, we don't want to think that people have bad intentions.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that, I guess my closing thought was on the USCCB, like the USCCB does not have power over any individual bishops. And I was working in communications. I was very close to the public relations people who were there at the time. And I remember some bishop would say something controversial and we get a bunch of complaints about that bishop. And I was like, one of my friends that worked there, I'm like, "Well, how do you handle stuff like that?" And he's like, "It's a local issue. We don't have any comment." And that's, it's in his jurisdiction. So,
So what's the main purpose of the USCCB?
the USCCB's main purpose would be as a place where US bishops can work together on initiatives, where they can have a larger voice rather than just being, the bishop of Gary, Indiana, making a statement. If multiple bishops have, believe that there's an important issue in the church that needs to be discussed or in the world, they can come together, they can vote on resolutions and vote on statements and come up with an initiative. In Indianapolis, you had that, you had the Eucharistic Congress. I mean, that was an initiative of the USCCB that, but it was sponsored by the national church. It just, took place in Indianapolis.
Well, we had the final Congress.
Yeah. But for example, I like to think of it, if you think of, all the countries in the world, there are 200 something countries, nations in the world, and each of them, is a sovereign state. You've got all these sovereign states, and that's what the dioceses are. Each one is a sovereign state. They're their own countries under their own systems of government, their own leadership. So each of these dioceses has a bishop. And then you have the UN, which is where representatives from all of the countries come together, and they come up with resolutions, they come up with programs, they come up with ideas of, initiatives to address world hunger or something like that, or, the Declaration on Human Rights. That's a global initiative, but it still respects the government of each country.
So when they come together, and that's usually in November, do they vote on their top 5 initiatives or?
Well, so basically they have a closed door meeting, and they have an administrative committee, which is, I think, like 30 of the bishops. And that administrative committee fields sort of ideas of what topics they might want to do a statement on. And then, like, I'm remembering back to that assisted suicide statement, and they actually meet twice a year, in June and November.
Oh, okay.
And maybe at the June meeting, they'll, the administrative committee will propose, and please don't quote me on this, but this is pretty close to how I think it works. They'll propose, we should draft a statement on assisted suicide. And then that will be an item for vote. And so then they'll vote, and let's say they say yes, 2/3,
Okay.
or, whatever percentage says, let's have a vote on assisted suicide, on doing a statement about assisted suicide. And then after that, they'll have a drafting committee, and it might take 1 or 2, maybe in November they'll have a draft, and they'll debate over the draft, and they'll have gotten feedback and that kind of thing. And then when it's finalized, they'll have a final vote, and then that statement will come out. There are other things that they do, like if there's a someone who's a nominee for sainthood in the United States, like Fulton J. Sheen was sponsored by, I believe, the Peoria Diocese in Illinois, and so he made it through all the steps in Illinois, and so the next step is for them to vote. They bring it to all the bishops. Should we send his cause onto the Holy See, into the dicastery for saints? And so they'll all, they'll vote on that. And obviously with Fulton Sheen, they said yes. And so he becomes a servant of God at that point. So they actually have the power to, I think it might have to officially come from the Pope, but once they vote on it, that person becomes a servant of God. So that's another sort of example.
Here's another example, which I thought, wow, I can't believe I was glad that they did it. It was the whole thing with Carrie Prejean Baller, who was talking about anti-Semitism and things like that. And Bishop Sample, who now I forgot his role at the USCCB, came out and said what the Catholic teaching is on anti-Semitism.
Yeah, so so they also have, on top of having a president, vice president, treasurer, secretary, they have committees, and two committees are required by canon law, like the Vatican II mandated, so liturgy and doctrine. But the USCCB also has cultural diversity, ecumenism and interreligious affairs. They have evangelization and catechesis. They have, I'm just trying to think of the names of the other communications, obviously. Like they have a bunch of, they have laity, marriage and family. They have one that's on clergy, consecrated life and vocations. So there's a bishop that's at the head of each of these committees. And I know that Archbishop Sample is at the head of one. I remember because the vote was a tie and he won in the tiebreak. So I remember a lot of, and it's funny because you'll see, did a statement come from the head of the committee? Did the statement, who's it signed by? Is it signed by just the president? Is it signed by the whole committee? So there are things that they will address like right on the ground. Bishop Seitz of El Paso is the head of the immigration committee. So he might issue a statement that's signed by 2 or 3 other bishops. That's not really on behalf of the whole bishops conference, but it has a little bit more heft than if he had just written it as Bishop of El Paso, or if Sample had written it as Archbishop of Portland.
He wrote it under his title at the USCCB.
Exactly.
His video. It was very good, I thought.
So that is the sort of thing. So a lot of times if it's a quick action thing, it'll be a statement that comes from an official bishop, or like a bishop's statement. Also, they have, they were in charge of implementing like the new translation of the Mass. If you remember back in 2010, 2011, there was a lot of work that went into overseeing, changing all of those Mass texts, and people were poring over it. And, they'd find, the Vatican would send something back and there would be like a mistranslation or something spelled wrong. And, so people would come up with these little remarks of, like I remember in the Eucharistic prayer number 1, where they list all the saints, we're getting the official International English version, and they're spelling Lawrence, St. Lawrence, with Laurenc. And so one of the amendments I remember specifically was, can we change it to the American spelling with a W? Just like that little, and they voted on that very question on the floor of the USCCB. Also, the New American Bible has been undergoing retranslation. Like they already did the Old Testament. I think the New Testament is close to coming out, with how they have the New American Bible Revised Edition. That only had to change to the Old Testament, and now they're revising the New Testament, which I think is the 3rd version of the New Testament. And then once that's translated, they're going to have to translate the lectionary of the Mass. because it's got all those readings from the Bible that are based on the New American Bible. But the readings of the Mass aren't always the same as what's in the Bible. Like when you buy a Bible, for example, if you read at the beginning of like the Gospel of the day in your missalette, or in the missal or in the lectionary, it'll say Jesus said to his disciples, and then it'll well, that Jesus said to his disciples might have been 7 paragraphs ago, and they're just taking a chunk. So it's like those kinds of things. They need to vote on all those. They need to create the text and then vote on whether or not they approve it. So that's, so little stuff like that. There are national initiatives. We also, the USCCB does the U.S. U.S. Catholic Catechism for Adults. It's the Red Catechism. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but
I have it back there.
So that is, I know that the reason why they put that out was so they didn't want to. The USCCB publishing didn't want to interfere with smaller Catholic publishers who were putting out children's catechisms.
Yeah.
But when the big green catechism came out, or I think it's blue now, but when that big catechism came out, it basically said that all catechisms that are subsequently published should be based on this catechism. And they're like, well, we do want to prepare something based on this catechism. So they're like, there's so many children's catechisms out there and teen catechisms out there, but there aren't really a lot of
catechism. I think it's called Youth Cat.
UCAT, yeah.
Yeah.
So they're like, let's make an adult catechism. And so that, it's much more readable than, it's not as dense, but it's, it's something that it's got lines where you can write notes in. So it's like a good RCIA or adult catechesis resource. So that's published by the USCCB. They used to run Catholic News Service.
I didn't know that.
Still exists. So this is CNS, not Catholic News Agency, but
yeah, right.
They still have their Rome bureau, but recently in budget cuts, they canceled the domestic office. Like they were right down the hall from me, but basically what they were was the wire service, like how, there's Associated Press and Reuters and, people. So basically they would have stories from around the country about what was going on in the local church in El Paso or wherever. And it was as a service back when dioceses had newspapers, and a lot of them, a few still do, but they're reducing it to like a once a month magazine or something like that. But these would be the wire stories that, if you're a local Catholic newspaper and you were publishing once a week, chances are you don't have enough journalists to write a bunch of stories. So they would provide, or you wouldn't be able to cover, if you're in Indianapolis and you want to cover a story, if you want to cover what happened at the USCCB meeting or at a big mass at St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York, you could, if you had a subscription to CNS, you would be able to, use the CNS story and put that in your newspaper. So that was a great service that they provided.
Well, Mike, we're coming up at almost an hour and a half. Well, we're over an hour and a half. Any last thoughts before we go to break, and then we'll take questions and comments?
I'm good. Let's just go to break.
Okay. So here is Mike's website, Where Peter Is website. And don't forget, he has a Patreon account as well. There it is. Thank you, Nicole. She is on it as always. So we're going to take a quick break, and then we'll be back with prayer, and we'll take your questions and comments for Mike. So stay with us through the break. Thank you very much for staying with us, and we're back. Mike, would you lead us in prayer, and let's make our prayer intentions for the bishops.
Absolutely.
And do you have any special prayer intention?
For all of the intentions that I can't remember right now.
All righty.
For all those who need someone to pray for them. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you. And everyone, if you are in the members only, we are beginning a prayer session every Sunday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for members only. Now, I hate putting it behind a paywall, everyone, but if you knew how much hate email I get, if you knew how much I get, I can't open it up to the public because I don't want the loonies coming in disrupting a prayer session. So members only, remember, you need to email me you need to email me so I can send you the Zoom link for Sunday night, and we'll cap it at an hour. Thank you, Nicole. There's my email address that you can use to email me and tell me that you're members only and that you would like the link to the Zoom call on Sunday evening. So anyhow, I've already heard from a few, but if I can hear from more of you, that would be great. All right, Nicole, let me bring you up for a second. There you are.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can hear you. Hi,
All right.
Nicole.
Are you ready for comments?
Yeah, everybody wants to see you anyhow.
Hi.
She
All
has
right.
her bionic eyes now.
We're not quite there yet, but more specialists. Pray for me.
Lisa. Hi, Lisa. Could you speak on Catholic political organizations like Catholic Vote that seems faithfully Catholic, but also seems to be beholden to a political party? I do have a story about that, Lisa, and that is Bishop Doherty in the Lafayette Diocese, who Catholic Vote is a part of. He had asked them not to be political, not to take sides, but they have not done that. And so he does not promote Catholic Vote anymore in the Lafayette Diocese. Mike, can you address this?
Yeah, I mean, another thing is, canonically, and I don't know if the bishop has been in, this is one of those things, has the bishop been in dialogue with them about it? Canonically,
he had been, Mike.
And if you use the name Catholic in your organization name,
you have to have that approved, don't you?
Yes. And so I think, that ultimately what could happen is, and because they aren't a church organization, they are a private organization a political organization really, that has Catholic in their name. Church Militant, if you remember, was once Real Catholic TV.
That's right.
And the Archbishop of Detroit asked them to take the name Catholic out of their title, and they took their name, and so they wound up changing it to Church Militant. Like, it's still a churchy name, and St. Michael's Media, like where Peter is, we don't. I was actually conscious of that canon. When we started, we didn't have any like official church recognition or anything, so I was going to respect that. There are a lot of things that call themselves Catholic that, could be like a mom and pop, Catholic bookstore, and nobody's going to do anything about it. But if you are representing yourself as Catholic, there's nothing that civil law can do to stop you from calling yourself Catholic. So you've got Catholics for choice. They don't care what the church tells them to do. So they can put, or you have like the Old Catholic Church, or you have people can start whatever Catholic, if they don't care what the bishops are telling them, they don't, they can still call themselves Catholic. But
well, Corpus Christi for Unity and Peace, who put on that fake Eucharistic Congress here in Indianapolis, I was on their board when it first started, and it was Catholics for Unity and Peace. And I told Vicky Yamasaki, you have to have bishop approval to use Catholic. And she went to Bishop Doherty, and she had to remove Catholic from the name because they weren't adhering to Catholic teaching.
yeah.
And it was a blessing I got fired from that board. But at the same time, and of course, she's gone completely the other way. She's a Father Altman. She's joined at the hip with him. Wherever Father Altman is, that's where she'll be. And Father and Bishop Strickland. But Bishop Doherty told me personally, well, I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah.
I just know a lot about that, and why they had to remove Catholic from their name. She's not. I mean, the organization is not respected here, and they're banned from doing any events at any Catholic church.
Yeah, I mean that's typically what's going on, and so like there's the organization Catholics for Catholics, which is also sort of a political front group, and some bishops maybe are more tolerant, or and a lot of people hear about this canon law, and they might have their Catholic homeschooling blog or something like that, and all of a sudden they get scared that the bishop is going to. I guess in theory, the bishop could strong arm them and tell them to take it out of their name. But I mean, most of the time, bishops tend to be pretty prominent or pretty tolerant if it's, something small and you're doing your best. But yeah, I mean, that's one of the few canonical measures. And it's interesting that Church Militant changed their name, because one of their things was that, at the time they were like, we're obedient to the church. We do whatever we follow. And so it was like, I guess Archbishop Vigneron was like, all right, change your name then.
Change your name.
And they had to. But actually, I think Church Militant was probably more catchy. So in retrospect,
it is. It's easier to say than Real Catholic TV or whatever it was. Yeah. All right. Next one, Nicole.
And I kind of have a follow-up to this one as well.
Oh, okay.
Personally.
Well, what is it?
Well, I guess I'm confused, and I'll probably take heat for saying this, I'm sure. So Bishop Strickland, technically, yes. I mean, he's a bishop, but he's a bishop without a diocese. And he was at this USCCB meeting speaking very, forcefully, making his views known. I guess I'm just kind of sitting here thinking, well, why is he even still there? Like, I don't get this tension between, yes, I guess he's still a bishop. He doesn't have a diocese. What is his job? Who's supporting him? What does he really do? I don't know.
The church isn't really built for the church is built for bishops to actually do their jobs, and if they're an emeritus bishop, to actually respect what an emeritus bishop is supposed to do. Now, there were a couple of years in a row where Strickland did not attend the meeting, but he protest outside. And it's like, okay, at this most recent meeting, not only did he participate, which as an emeritus bishop, he has technically the right to do, but
so he doesn't have to be invited.
Well, they could decide, to treat him specially, but really he was just removed. There was no quote unquote discipline.
Right.
He wasn't punished. He was removed from office, which basically means he's a retired bishop. He's the emeritus bishop of Tyler, Texas. I think he was maybe instructed to move out of the diocese, and I think he's living elsewhere in Texas now. But when you're dealing with someone who's kind of a live wire, he's gonna do whatever he wants to do. If he doesn't believe in the system, if he doesn't believe in the authority of, if he doesn't respect the ecclesial structure, I guess it's a question of how much attention do you want to draw to it. I personally think that, and just personally, I think that he should have been removed in 2020. Like, he was already tweeting conspiracy theories and all kinds of things by then. But the church decided to take a more patient approach. And then when he was finally relieved of his duties, there was no big public renunciation of him. It was just sort of like, okay, he's been replaced. There's this new guy now. They had an administrator in there for a while who actually made some big concrete changes, I think, so that when they finally named the official bishop of the diocese, the permanent replacement, he wasn't demonized right off the bat. It's a delicate situation. I don't really know what to say other than, this is a situation where, if you read Where Peter Is, or if you follow my Twitter, I tend to be pretty frank on my opinions about what should happen to people. Now, on Where Peter Is, since we're trying to think with the church and we're not trying to contradict the Pope, I think I've mentioned this before, but there was a situation where, and Pedro Gabriel was the one who sort of set our direction on this. My first article about Bishop Strickland in 2020, as the editors were looking at my draft of that article, at the end, I said something like, he has to go, or like, he needs to be removed. And Pedro Gabriel said, I like your article, except for that one sentence, because basically what you're doing is you're putting pressure on the Pope. Ultimately it's up to him. And it's like, now, I think you can disagree with the Pope on prudential issues, but people are coming to Where Peter Is to read stuff that is in line with the Pope.
Yeah.
So I took out that sentence, or I said, this is something that the Vatican will have to look at more, something like that. But rather than put that specific recommendation in there. But yeah, it's one of those things where it's like, in the age of the internet, these problems go far beyond the local diocese. And I don't think that the church has started, because, the Diocese of Tyler is this, it's Texas. It's like 98% Baptist. There were people moving to Tyler because of Bishop Strickland, actually, but
Mother Miriam.
Most of us, and he took her in, unlike the dioceses that have kicked her out. But he, just like Father Chad Ripperger, if his ministry was limited to the people he was dealing with in Denver, like that, it's still a problem, but it's a local problem. But because he's going on Tucker Carlson and on Sean Ryan's show, and millions of people are listening to his message, most of them don't live in Denver, and so even though the only person with any authority over him is the Archbishop of Denver, by not doing anything about him, it's spreading worldwide. So that's, yeah. So I do have my thoughts. I think that the church should be more transparent, and I think that some adjustments do need to be made in this current era, because of the tendency of scandals to go global. I think that some reform needs to be made in terms of being able to communicate that there's a problem, and the church taking those problems seriously and addressing the scope of them.
So we have Catholic Hoosier. Hey, Catholic Hoosier, I'm a Hoosier too.
All right. So this is my question about the internet, basically. We just mentioned the internet, but so as social media grows, bishops need to be more attentive, in my opinion, in terms of taking disciplinary actions when needed. Is this even on their radar? I'm wondering. I would think it is. It would have to be, but how seriously?
For some it is, and for some it isn't. And it's funny because, it's one of those things. I know that, and I'm sorry if I'm telling the same stories over and over again, but one of the reasons why Where Peter Is got on the radar, we were going from 300 or 400 hits a day to thousands, 10,000 hits a day during the Amazon Synod, and nobody, basically, you had some of the more reactionary, fundamentalist, traditionalist websites were freaking out over there being demons worshipped in the Vatican gardens, and then you had sort of the mainstream, moderate, progressive journalists who are all covering what was going on inside the synod. Like, are they talking about women deacons? Are they talking about married priests? And nobody was addressing the tree planting ceremony that took place on St. Francis's feast day, except for Where Peter Is. And Pedro Gabriel and I worked on all these articles, and it was, that basically people on the ground level, people in the parishes were hearing, even from the pulpit or in their Bible studies, we're hearing that there was idolatry in the Vatican gardens, and Pope Francis was okay with it. And I think a lot of people maybe were naturally skeptical, go online to see what it's all about, and people were trying to get the other side of the story, and that's how they found us, because we were the only ones telling that side of the story. And we also encountered Vatican officials who basically said, don't give them any oxygen, they're just out of their minds. This isn't, if you condemn them, that will only publicize them more, and that was a line of thinking that maybe worked before the internet, but now it's like anything can instantly become a global phenomenon or a global scandal. And so I think some bishops are on top of it, but even they are working quietly behind the scenes, or don't really know how to handle it. I've heard from 7 bishops probably or more personally, that they're very concerned about Father Chad Ripperger. And I've heard from dozens of priests. And they're very concerned about the message that he's giving and the influence that he's having. But in their roles, if they bring attention to Father Chad Ripperger, it's,
they've made him a martyr.
It could make him a martyr. It's every time Jerry Springer had the Ku Klux Klan on his show, Klan membership went up. Even though Jerry Springer, Jewish guy condemning them, well, the show that show was something else, but you know what I'm saying. So it's a calculus. You've got to weigh, if I draw public attention to this, or if I try. And even in the case, like I was saying, of Vigano, it was him who was, anything that they sent to Vigano, even if it was a confidential document, and it was a confidential document to protect his privacy and his good name, he's splashing it all over the internet. And so the same thing could happen with any of these these figures. But yeah, I guess your question, bishops need to be more attentive to it. I don't know what the solution is. I feel that because nobody really, or very few people, were addressing this stuff, especially from like a faithful Catholic perspective, and the fact that I had been in sort of that traditionalist, or at least that mindset, that more culture warrior, conservative. Not that I hate using the word conservative, because being a conservative is not in and of itself wrong, but understanding the mindset and having kind of broken free from it, I felt like I was uniquely situated to understand the way that they were thinking and why certain things were outraging them. Just like we were talking about other countries. When I was in France 2 years ago at the French Catholic Media Conference, it's funny, and I think this might be why Cardinal Pierre and I got to know each other. Like, the French were just fascinated hearing about what American Catholics think. They're just like, really? It's like endlessly amazing and unbelievable and entertaining to them to hear about the sorts of things that U.S. Catholics do and think. And they have their own traditionalists. The SSBX hub is there, but yeah, and I think a lot of bishops are of an age where they were formed before the internet. They're in their 60s and 70s now. They came of age when Vatican II was still new and exciting and in full swing, and they don't quite get the internet backlash that's emerged since like 2000, early 2000s, 2005, 2010. And it's funny because one of the things that we did early on at Where Peter Is, the thing is, the tradition, basically Vatican II happened and they had their own version of like the liturgy wars and the culture wars, and everything was sort of settled in the 1970s and 80s, right? And Vatican II was kind of on its way to being implemented. The Mass was reformed, traditionalism was sort of marginalized, and then the internet came around and traditionalists started making their arguments again, the exact same arguments they were making in the 70s and 80s, and got pushed to the side, and they're putting them online. But the problem was the arguments from the 70s and 80s and 90s that were countering the traditionalist arguments were not online. And so, and it's funny because so the Internet Archive and their old books section has been like a treasure, because it's like I'm digging up all these books from the 1980s from their lending library and seeing like, wow, these things were already addressed. I mean, Andrew Locutus, who is the grandson of James Locutus, who is he wrote the book The Pope, the Council, and the Mass, that sort of defended the reforms, defended papal primacy. I think it was originally published in 1980 and then republished in the 1990s. It was making the same, authoritative answers to but the book had been out of print for a while. And there's so much more traditionalist propaganda now than there was back then. But it's funny because I would read these things from the 1970s that were written by traditionalists. These are the same arguments that Peter Kwasniewski and Taylor Marshall and Joseph Shaw, are making. It's like they're just recycling it, and people are eating. And because there's no opposition to it, because the bishops just think that these arguments are settled, they aren't even bothering to respond to it.
There is one bishop that understands the whole social media thing.
Which one do you think that is? Or
Bishop Barron.
Well, yeah. Although he's kind of doing his own thing.
I understand that, but he does get how social media is good and bad. It can be evil, and it can be, for the good as well. He understands it. I just don't know that other bishops do, because there seems to be this this thought that, it'll all settle down.
Yeah. Well, and Bishop Strickland is one of the more active bishops on social media.
There you go. Yeah.
And he's
him
building
too.
up his influence through social media.
Mm-hmm.
I do know that certain bishops, every time they tweet something, they get attacked. And so a lot of times they've either stopped using social media, or it'll just be a Bible verse and a quote of the day and, a prayer or something like that. Or this is my official statement on Easter. It's not, they don't engage like some of them do, where they don't. And I mean, there is some, I guess the question is, so there are people that are above the fray, and I'm not gonna, criticize that. I don't know. I'm not above the fray. I'm in the fray. So I think all three of us are in the fray. So it's sometimes it's hard to relate. But I also know that lay people with platforms who are sticking up for the church and who are defending the bishops and the Pope are appreciated. And so it can feel thankless at times, but one of the things that I knew, was Cardinal Pierre is never going to comment on what happened in that meeting.
Right.
He's a diplomat. He's been a diplomat for 50 years. He's been trained. He knows when to keep his mouth shut. He knows just how far he's going to go. It's just, it's the way he's trained.
We don't need to know everything.
I was going to say that. Why do we need to know everything?
We don't.
We don't.
And I mean, and that's what I'm saying. Like, if whether they were laughing the whole time or whether they were screaming at each other in the meeting, that doesn't change how the Pope thinks of the war. You know?
It changes nothing.
It changes nothing. But like I'm saying, like that, so there are, without divulging anything specific that he told me, one of the reasons why he reached out to me was because I was one of the few people in the US who was accurately trying to give Pope Francis his message. And other people were distorting it, or they were either saying he was this hardcore progressive who was going to change everything, or that he was a heretic who was worshiping Pachamama in the Vatican gardens. Like, there's no, like, in terms of balanced, like, this is what the Pope is thinking type coverage.
Mike,
like, yeah,
you just burst my bubble. I thought Cardinal Pierre reached out to you because he knew you were going to be on the Eternal Life Plan show.
Yeah. He probably wouldn't like me talking about him right now, but he's very discreet. He's a gentleman. He's a consummate. Yeah, and I think the thing is, I think being French, he was very entertained by my stories about the American church.
Well, Nicole, do you want to go to the next question or comment? Okay, Lisa. Hi, Lisa. Do you want to read it, Nicole, or do you want me?
Well, yeah, with my one eye, Christine. Sure.
No,
I'll do it. I'm kidding.
Okay.
I'm glad that you brought up that in the 80s that the liturgical wars -- primacy of the Pope was settled. I have noticed that there does seem to be a historical amnesia.
Oh, yeah, good one.
I mean, and that's the thing. A lot of times I would bring up, one of the things that we published on Where Peter Is are 4 or 5 documents that were published in audiences that were that Pope Paul VI wrote about these things, like apostolic exhortations and stuff like that. You can't find them on the Vatican website, or they might only be in Italian and Latin on the Vatican website. And it's unfortunate. There's also a series of 10 audiences by John Paul II on the papacy that he gave in, I think, the early 90s. And for whatever reason, they are somewhere on the internet on kind of like a weird British website. And so that's where I've accessed them. But and I've written articles about, I think, the first 4, maybe I'll get to all 10 of them, but really that are laying out the authority of the Pope. And this is, that was one of the things that people didn't really seem to understand. It's like, people seem to think that they, or Taylor Marshall or Cardinal Burke or Father Rittberger apparently has veto power over the Pope. Like, they're like, well, yeah, we have to obey the Pope unless the thing that he teaches is not traditional. And it's like,
there's a real problem in the church with obedience, Mike.
Yeah, and the thing that they don't seem to realize, people are, and some, even like some, like, serious theologians have proposed, well, we need a canonical structure that can that can check and see whether the Pope's teachings are true. Like, how in the church are they ever going to come up with a group like that? Like, first of all, who's going to appoint them? Like, the Pope. And is he going to appoint people? It just, like, the thing is, according to canon law, and actually divinely revealed in Matthew, in the Gospel of Matthew, the Pope is the check and the balance. So, like, if Archbishop Lefebvre says this thing is not traditional, or somebody says this teaching is not orthodox, it's like the buck stops here. Canon law says the first see is judged by no one. Doctrines can develop, maybe there can be, but it's like, no, this is the official line of the church. What the Pope says goes. He's not, and then people are like, oh, so you want to blindly obey the Pope, or he's not an absolute monarch. They always sort of misquote or misinterpret this quote from Benedict, where he says, the Pope only hands on what has been revealed, and the Pope is the guardian. He's not the master of doctrine. Okay, these are declarative sentences. So that means that when the Pope is teaching, that's what he's doing. He's preserving the faith. He's guarding the doctrine. You can have trust that this is in line with what the church is teaching. but they sort of say, they see it as like an instruction manual. Like the Pope is supposed to do that, but when I don't think he is, then he's not. It doesn't, it's like, so, what is the rule of faith then? And they'll say tradition, or they'll say, I prefer, the 265 popes that came before, and it's like, but they're dead. There's only one Pope now, and he's the one, and it even said, he's the authentic interpreter of scripture and tradition. I mean, well, he and the bishops teaching in communion with him, but ultimately the buck stops with the Pope.
Nicole?
Yeah, I think we have one more, and this one's kind of interesting to me. Catholic vote seems to have an influence on how Catholics should think. And there are Catholic influencers that are really well known that seem to influence others in the same way, forming conscience. So I like that question because I do think that there is a vacuum at the parish level of forming conscience. I do.
Yeah.
I don't think priests and bishops are taking those opportunities to speak on these issues to form an Orthodox Catholic conscience. So that vacuum, social media is rushing in to fill it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I mean, it's a tough thing. I mean, a priest once told me, he's like, I don't agree with Taylor Marshall. I don't like Taylor Marshall, but all of my best parishioners are Taylor Marshall fans. Catholics who take their faith seriously are going to wind up looking for Catholic stuff online, and they're going to come across this stuff, it is a big problem that can grow out, that could grow out of hand, if it hasn't already. But I mean,
I think it has.
It has. I think the U.S. and this, like David Gray was saying, it's a U.S. specific problem, but it's a big problem in the U.S. church, because Catholics who are seen as Orthodox, or presented as Orthodox, and presented as the most the reliable guys, the good guys, are a lot of times these people that have opposed popes, that have opposed developments in doctrine, who opposed the liturgical reforms after Vatican II. And yeah, I mean, Catholic vote is, unfortunately, it's kind of spilled into politics too. But it's also a whole ideology. It's a whole system of, at a certain point, they were told not to trust Pope Francis. And I think they've sort of enculturated that so that they can sort of sift. I mean, right now they're nicer to Pope Leo, but I think they're sifting out certain things that he's saying, depending on whether they already agree with it or not.
Mike, I have a term that I invented called Catholic poly.
Yes.
And it's, Catholics that are merging their politics in with Catholic teaching, but the Catholic politics comes first, and they expect the Catholic teaching to be reformed around that. And I call that Catholic poly, and it is prevalent on social media.
Well, and it's funny because a lot of times, like I've told you in the past, it's like, I'm not, like, one of the big things in sort of my faith development was around 2012 or so. I used to be one of those people that read that read all the political updates every day, that followed the president approval ratings and the upcoming election daily tracking polls. Like, I was into the election, and I was emotionally invested in the election, and the whole election gave me a headache. And and on a certain day, I don't know if I was praying or if I was in mass, but I was going to weekly adoration at the time. It just occurred to me, like, you know what? It's like, this really isn't under my control. I live in a one-party state even. So it's like my, in my district, it's like, there's no, and I was like, you know what? I'm just going to focus on my faith. I'm going to focus on issues. I'm going to focus on Catholic teaching and what the church teaches about certain issues. And so that's been my entire mindset. But, since I've been running Where Peter Is in 2020 and in 2024, and we sort of went out of our way not to specifically attack candidates by name. We definitely never endorsed a candidate. We definitely never said who you have to vote for, anything like that. And like,
that's what Catholic Vote does.
yeah, I mean, I had a stomach ache from editing out Trump's name from stuff, in 2020. I think I lost a lot of hair that year. And no matter what we published, half of the comments would be about why we were helping Biden or why we were helping Trump, or or I guess it was Biden and Trump in 2020. I cared less in 2024 what people said, but it was like, that wasn't what I was thinking about. I was thinking about whatever issue was, whether that was right or wrong. But it's like, to me, it was detached from the upcoming election. But people always saw it in terms of the election. And then I know after my first Ripburger article, I remember somebody posted it on Facebook and said, this is a good article. And I replied, and a woman replied to me and said, who did you vote for?
What?
That was her comment. Like as if my article clearly meant that I was, a political operative or something like that. And it's just sort of like, what does that even have to do with it? But that seems to be the litmus test is who you voted for in the election. And
see, Catholic Polly.
Yeah. And it's like, what does that even have to do with Father Chad Ripperger?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I guess maybe we mentioned that his deliverance prayers on the voting machines, because witches had cursed the voting machines or something like that. Like, I think I mentioned that in the article, but that wasn't even the center of my article. I don't know, but yeah, that's.
Is there any more comments?
Well, this is our very last one. We're just saying.
Okay.
Hi,
Kayla. Hi. If
Hi,
you're
Kayla.
Catholic, you should believe in the magisterium.
Period.
Absolutely. Period.
Good last comment.
Yeah. The issue is knowing what the magisterium is.
Right.
That's a big one. I mean, that's.
Maybe we'll have you back for that one.
I'd be happy to talk to you about that. It's complicated because I think they distort the meaning of it.
Yeah. So Mike has agreed to come back once a month, and it's usually the first Thursday of the month, but because of Holy Week last week, Holy Thursday, as you know, I didn't do any videos last week because of Holy Week.
And I was getting my feet washed at my parish.
You were getting your feet washed.
I was one of the 12 apostles. And I was the tallest one, so they made me last. So I said, does it mean I'm Judas?
I hope you washed your feet before they washed your feet.
I did. It's sort of weird. You definitely want to pre-scrub before.
Yeah, I've been up there. It's weird.
I know.
My first time in a long time.
Yeah. So anyhow, he'll be back the first Thursday in May, and maybe we'll have you do magisterium then, Mike.
Yeah. I mean, unless there's a huge news story or something that we need to cover.
Right. Yeah. So, all right, everyone. Gosh, Mike, thank you. You've been here 2 hours and
oh my goodness,
17 minutes.
I have a big mouth, so maybe you should have a mute clicker for me just to cut me off if I'm talking too long.
Well, we could put on one of those collars that you
shot collar.
Increase the intensity as I go on too long.
Right. No, we love having you, Mike. You always have so much information to share, and we learn so much when you come on. So I really, really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having me.
All right, everyone. Nicole, do you have any final words? No, it was a great show. Thank you. Thank you to everybody in the chat. It was a good chat tonight. Very calm, very intelligent.
And we like that.
Yes.
So don't forget, members only Sunday night, and be sure to send me an email. It's really easy, eternallifeplan@gmail.com. And remember how we end. Eternal life is forever. Got a plan? Our plan should be Jesus. and I know it is for all of you. God bless you all, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. I hope you had a wonderful Easter.